Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send us, really dive in, and pull out the key knowledge, those surprising bits, and the core insights you need.
Yeah, the goal is to help you feel genuinely informed on, well, often pretty complex topics without drowning in all the noise out there.
We're your guides today, basically helping you navigate the material, pointing out what really stood out to us and why it matters, all based on the perspective in the sources you provided. And for this deep dive, we're tackling something just massive, fundamental really to modern life. Semiconductors, they're kind of the hidden engine powering, well, almost everything.
They really are everywhere.
Our source material here is a really fascinating conversation. It's with an expert who has this pretty rare mix of skills.
Right, like deep industry knowledge, but also hands-on trading experience and that kind of high-level executive view from inside a semiconductor company.
Exactly. That combination, the tech understanding, the financial market angle, and the practical operational reality, it gives a really unique perspective on this whole industry.
It's a viewpoint you don't often get all in one place.
Totally. So our mission today is pretty clear. We're going to walk you through this source material, highlight the most important takeaways from this specific expert's view, and help you understand what's really driving the semiconductor world right now.
But only based on what's in that source material, no adding our own stuff.
Exactly. Consider this your shortcut to getting up to speed on a really critical topic. Let's dive in.
All right.
So, to start, we really need to set the scene. Understand the global picture for semiconductors, because as our source really stresses, this isn't just a local thing. It's deeply, intensely global.
Oh, absolutely. The source lays out a pretty clear history. It traces the roots back to the U.S., specifically mentioning Texas Instruments, TI, founded way back in the 1960s. That was kind of the starting block.
So the U.S. kicked it off, but it didn't stay contained there for long. It quickly became this globalized industry we see today.
Yeah.
And a really key moment, according to the source, was the rise of TSMC.
Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, founded in Taiwan, in the 1980s. That was pivotal.
And there's this interesting link back to the U.S. origins. The source points out Morris Chang, who was key to TSMC. He actually left TI when he didn't get the CEO job.
Right. And not just him, but a lot of the early technical know-how, the equipment, the critical tech that got TSMC running it came with significant help from people who had, U.S. educational backgrounds. It wasn't developed in total isolation.
That flow of talent and knowledge across borders, that seems like a really crucial piece. And TSMC's success, it wasn't just good for Taiwan. It had this ripple effect.
Yeah, the source highlights how other places in Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, they looked at what TSMC achieved and thought, hey, semiconductors could be a massive engine for us too.
Like a pathway to development.
Exactly, a way to create a ton of jobs, boost social stability, drive up GDP. They saw the potential.
And you saw real changes happen because of that.
Yeah, definitely. The source mentioned assembly plants, for instance, that used to be in places like California. They started moving operations to Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, these new emerging hubs.
So it wasn't just building new stuff from scratch. It was also existing parts of the chain-shifting location drawn by that economic promise.
And this global spread continued. China's semiconductor industry started developing, especially after they joined the WTO. That added another huge market and manufacturing base into the mix.
Right, completing the picture of this truly global industry with major capabilities spread across different regions.
Yeah.
And the big takeaway from all this history, the source really hammers this home, is that today's semiconductor industry has an incredibly clear global division of labor.
It's not just that different countries participate. They specialize intensely in very specific parts of the whole process.
Okay, so building on that global picture, the source also dives into some of the key companies and early innovations that really shape things.
Right. Beyond the huge manufacturers like TSMC, you have the designers, the Fableless companies.
Fableless. Meaning they design the chips, but don't actually make them in their own factories, their own fabs.
Exactly. They design the brains, the blueprint, but someone else does the heavy lifting of manufacturing. The U.S., especially Silicon Valley, is pointed out as a major historical hub for these design powerhouses.
And Qualcomm gets mentioned as a prime example.
Yeah, founded by a professor in San Diego. Initially, their focus was quite specific, something like quality communication, improving radio signals.
Yeah, okay.
But that foundation let them expand massively into general communication, telecom chips, became a giant.
And ARM's another big design name mentioned.
Right. ARM came out of a split or spinoff from another well-known semiconductor company. Their designs are in, well, practically every smartphone.
And then you have the CPU guys, the core processors. Intel, obviously linked to Moore's Law.
That observation about transistors doubling, yeah, it's still kind of amazing.
And AMD's in there, too. It was a little side note about a previously flashy CEO. Adds a bit of color.
Yeah, personalities definitely play a role, even here. But none of this design work matters without the machines to actually make the chips. And the source really highlights ASML.
The lithography equipment. The
Right.
machines that etch those impossibly tiny patterns onto the silicon.
Exactly. It's incredibly complex, a real bottleneck technology. And the source notes something interesting. Companies like Canon and Nikon were involved early on, but actually dropped out.
Really? Why?
The source doesn't detail why they dropped out, but mentions that TSMC saw the huge potential and collaborated really heavily with European and U.S. research labs to push ASML's technology forward.
So that collaboration was key again. Even for this super specialized cutting-edge equipment, it wasn't done alone.
No, it's often this deep international effort, which really underscores that global division of labor point again.
Okay, so we got the history, the global spread, some key players. Now let's get into the actual process. How does a chip get made, especially looking at that Fableless model the source emphasizes?
Right, for a fabless company, their main thing is the design, the intellectual property. The process starts way before any silicon gets touched.
Step 1. Figure out what the chip needs to do, the specs.
Yep. Define the specifications, what's its purpose, what performance does it need, all that.
Then step 2 is the really intricate part, designing the actual circuit layout.
Oh yeah, that's translating the specs into the physical arrangement of millions, sometimes billions, of transistors and connections. Super complex.
Once that design's locked down, step 3 is sending it off.
That's the tape out. You send the design files to a foundry, the manufacturing partner.
And the foundry makes some initial chips.
Right. Step 4 is getting those sample chips back. The design company and their customers then test these samples rigorously. Do they work? Do they meet the specs?
Customer validation. Crucial step.
Absolutely. And only if everything checks out, then you move to step 5, placing the orders for mass production. That's when you really ramp up volume.
Okay, that makes sense. Design, send out, test samples, then mass produce if it works. But the source adds another layer after the foundry step.
Yeah, packaging and testing. The source uses the term FEN. This happens after the silicon wafer comes out of the fab. It's a distinct step.
And this packaging and testing, it's not just an afterthought. It has real cost impact.
Definitely. The source mentions the cost proportion varies, maybe higher for analog chips than digital, but critically, it's identified as a place where companies can look for cost savings.
No.
By using non-standard packaging methods, maybe more efficient ways to put the chip in its final protective casing and test it, compared to competitors using standard approaches.
Interesting. So innovation happens even at the packaging stage. And knowing where it's done matters too.
Yeah, the source specifically mentions some major players in China for this part of the chain, like Tongfu Microelectronics, J-Seat Group, Huaishan Technology. Knowing who does the packaging is part of the picture.
So the journey isn't over when the chip leaves the fab. Packaging and testing is another whole stage with its own costs and players.
Exactly. It's another piece of that complex global puzzle.
Okay, speaking of mass production and costs, that leads us right into market dynamics, specifically inventory cycles. The source really highlighted how dramatically things changed before and during the big chip shortage.
Oh, massively. Before the shortage, ordering capacity from a foundry was, well, relatively flexible. You could call them up, place monthly orders, maybe cancel them fairly easily if your forecast changed.
Done just in time.
Sorta, yeah. There was more flexibility, but the pandemic, the supply chain mess, that threw everything out the window.
How so?
During the shortage, that flexibility just vanished.
Yeah.
Companies needing chips for their products, the source used washing machine factories as an example, something relatable. They started placing huge orders.
Just to get anything they could.
Pretty much. Ordering way beyond what they actually needed immediately, sometimes just speculating because they were desperate to secure any supply in that environment of scarcity. Panic buying, essentially.
And the result of everyone doing that.
Predictable, right. We ended up in the situation we're largely still dealing with now. Significant overstocking all through the supply chain. Inventory just piled up everywhere.
From raw wafers to finished goods on shelves.
Yep. Mountains of chips. And a consequence of living through that whipsaw effect, the source notes, is that now, if you're a new chip company taping out a design,
Yeah.
You often need to give the foundry capacity guarantees. They want commitment.
The foundries got burned too, or at least saw the chaos. And now they want more certainty up front.
Exactly. It shifted from that flexible, almost reactive ordering to needing to lock in production slots way in advance. Adds a whole new layer of planning and risk for the designers. That change is a really key point from the source.
Right, that shift in how capacity gets managed is a really big deal.
Yep.
Okay, let's pivot a bit now. Let's talk about investment angles, technology drivers. The source suggested that if you're hunting for, alpha, real outperformance, the focus often lands on those chip design companies, the Fableless ones.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because it's a super competitive market, things move fast. But evaluating them isn't simple. You need to look beyond just the chip's performance specs.
What are the critical factors then, according to the source?
First off, foundry choice. It's not just that they use a foundry, but which one? And are they using a standard process or something non-standard?
Why does which foundry matter so much?
Well, the source says TSMC is widely seen as the best, highest yield, most advanced tech, but also the most expensive. Other foundries, maybe UMC or SMIC, might have lower yield.
And lower yield means?
It directly hits your ability to deliver chips reliably on time and affects your cost per working chip. So the foundry choice impacts volume, reliability, cost, everything.
Yield is king, basically. Okay, second factor.
Packaging and testing. That Fen step again. Is it standard or non-standard?
And non-standard could be an advantage.
Potentially, yeah. If you have a clever, non-standard packaging approach, you might cut costs compared to competitors. Gives you an edge. And again, where it's done matters, those domestic Chinese players were mentioned as important factors there.
So competitiveness can even come from the package itself. Third factor. Downstream customers.
Absolutely vital. Who's actually buying their chips? What markets are they selling into? Is demand in those markets strong? This tells you about the real pull for the designer's products.
Makes sense. You need end demand.
The source even suggested, if you can, talking to the engineers at the customer companies, get their perspective on how the chips are really performing. That's deep diligence.
Wow, okay, that's getting granular. Fourth factor. Product thinking.
This is about their design philosophy. Are they making general-purpose chips for everyone? Or are they starting with a specific customer's problem, designing a custom solution, and then maybe trying to sell it more widely?
How does that affect things?
It impacts their potential market size, how reusable their core designs might be across different applications, different strategies.
Got it. And the final factor mentioned, volume.
Super critical for costs. Your whole cost structure looks completely different if you're making 1,000 chips versus 10,000 or 10 million. Yields change, cost per unit change dramatically.
Right.
And the source had a strong warning here. Differentiate production based on real demand versus speculation. They actually use the term like stock trading behavior. Companies just ordering to look busy or hit a quarterly target.
That sounds like a recipe for future inventory disaster.
Exactly. It's a huge red flag. So yeah, assessing a design company takes digging into their foundry relationship, packaging, customers, design strategy, and whether their volume is real.
It's complex.
No kidding. But it paints a much clearer picture of why finding those winners is tough. Okay, let's dive into some specific tech drivers now. The source put a lot of emphasis on advanced packaging, specifically the rise of chiplets.
Chiplets, yeah. Huge trend.
It sounds futuristic, but you're saying it's happening right now. Oh, yeah. The source mentioned existing cost-effective methods like chip-in-package, CIP, or double-sided packaging, ways to cram more stuff into one package.
But the real buzz is around more advanced stuff.
Exactly. Moving towards 2.5D and 3D packaging. The source mentioned LADE, presumably some kind of advanced substrate or package structure as part of this trend, and pointed to big investments like KLA Tencor putting maybe $2 billion USD into a packaging factory.
$2 billion just for packaging, that's serious money. But step back, why chiplets? What's the problem they're solving?
It comes down to physics, really. There's a practical limit to how big you can make a single traditional chip, a monolithic die, roughly 850 square millimeters.
Why the limit?
Go bigger than that. And your yield, the percentage of working chips you get off a wafer just tanks. The chance of a defect somewhere on that huge area becomes too high.
Ah, okay. Bigger target, easier to hit with a defect.
Pretty much. The source noted how companies making massive chips, like NVIDIA's H100, keep the area just under that limit, maybe 800-something square millimeters, to keep yields decent. And crucially, you want that precious area for the core compute power, not necessarily for memory or I/O.
So the answer is break it up.
Exactly. Chiplets take different functions, compute, memory, I/O, make them as separate, smaller chiplets.
Yeah.
Then you connect them together.
How do you connect them? Sounds tricky.
It is. You use really high-density interconnects on some kind of base, a substrate. Could be a high-density organic one, which is often cheaper, or a more expensive silicon interposer for the highest performance connections.
Okay, sounds complex to assemble. What's the payoff? The economic benefit?
This is where it gets really compelling, especially for specialized chips, ASICs. Designing a complex monolithic ASIC on an advanced node, say 14 nanometer, might cost, I don't know, $20, $30 million USD, maybe more.
That's a huge barrier to entry.
Totally. But with chiplets, you could maybe use a cutting-edge compute chiplet, but combine it with I/O or other functions made on older, cheaper nodes like 28 nanometer. The source suggested this could bring the total cost for a complex custom chip down below $10 million.
Wow, that's less than half. That really opens things up.
It potentially democratizes custom silicon design. The core value the source highlighted is reusability. Breaking designs into standard chiplets lets you mix and match proven components. Big guys like Qualcomm and Broadcom are already doing this.
And AMD is a prime example mentioned.
Yeah, AMD's story is illustrative. Before chiplets, if they wanted, say, 15 different processor versions, they might have needed 15 separate full chip designs.
This is incredibly inefficient.
It was. 15 design teams, maybe 15 different manufacturing flows. Now, with chiplets, they might have, say, just 3 core compute chiplet designs and maybe 3 different I/O chiplet designs, 6 basic building blocks.
And by combining those 6,
they can create more than 15 final product variants. Just by mixing and matching those few reusable pieces, it's way more efficient economically.
that's a massive difference. And this links back to Moore's law somehow.
Yeah, because the traditional Moore's law scaling, just shrinking transistors on one chip, is getting harder and way more expensive, especially at the leading edge. Moving from 7 millimeters to 5 millimeter or 5 millimeter to 3 nanometer, the cost per transistor isn't dropping like it used to.
And the performance gains aren't as big either.
Right. It's getting prohibitively expensive for diminishing returns. The source noted fewer companies could even afford advanced nodes after 14 millimeter. TSMC was the main option, but super costly. Chiplets are a way to keep improving system performance and functionality economically, even if simple shrinking is slowing down. It's a necessary step until we get, breakthroughs like 1 nanometer tech.
So chiplets help keep the performance train rolling when the old track gets too expensive. Where are we with adoption? Is it still niche?
Not niche, but definitely more established at the high end right now. The source mentioned industrial-grade examples, Tesla's D1 chip, NVIDIA's big compute chips, AMD's processors. These have used chiplets commercially for maybe 2-3 years already.
Okay, so proven and demanding applications. What's next?
The big push is into consumer products. Phones, PCs, all the IoT stuff, watches, smart lights, you name it. The main hurdle there is improving the yield of the assembly process, putting the chiplets together reliably and cheaply enough for high-volume consumer markets.
Cost is everything in consumer. How does chiplet packaging stack up cost-wise?
It can save on the bill of materials, BOM, by integrating functions better or using direct chip-to-chip connections like TSVs through silicon vias. But like I said, the key challenge for broad cost effectiveness right now is getting that assembly yield way up. TSMC is apparently best at this currently.
So the tech works, it's past the invention stage. Now it's about scaling and refining the manufacturing process to make it cheap enough for mass market, the 1 to 10 stage, as the source put it.
Exactly. Billions invested, used in industrial already. Consumer adoption is mostly an engineering challenge of yield improvement.
Makes sense. Okay, beyond chiplets tackling scaling, what other big forces are driving semiconductor demand? AI came up huge in the source.
Oh, absolutely. AI development. The most certain impact is the need for just massive amounts of compute power. AI models are incredibly power hungry.
Which means building out infrastructure?
Yep. Huge server farms, tons of compute capacity in data centers, and also large-scale deployment of optical modules for high-speed data connections within and between those centers.
The source also mentioned a shift in the type of chips being used for AI, from GPUs to
NPUs, neural processing units, chips specifically designed and optimized for running these large AI models efficiently.
And AI isn't just a cloud thing, right? It's hitting-edge devices, too.
Big time. AI allows training smaller, specialized models derived from those big open-source ones, and these smaller models can actually run offline, directly on your phone, your smart speaker, industrial sensors.
How do they run locally? What's the tech?
Using products with compute and memory. Basically, doing the processing right where the data, the model parameters, is stored, allows devices to store millions of parameters locally.
And the benefit of doing AI processing on the device itself.
It's faster, more efficient. The device can do initial processing, like pulling key tokens from your voice command on a smart speaker. Only the important bits get sent to the cloud.
So less data flying back and forth.
Exactly. Improves cloud efficiency, uses less bandwidth, and gives you that near real-time response. Cuts down those annoying 3 to 5 second delays waiting for the cloud.
That explains why things feel snappier.
Yeah.
It's local processing.
The source compared it to software updates, like new Android versions. Edge AI capabilities are constantly improving as they iterate on those open source models.
What kind of memory tech is used in these compute and memory chips?
Things like SRAM, MRAM, ReRAM were mentioned, but the source also noted there are physical limits right now affecting how big a model you can actually store and run effectively on the edge.
Stepping back, how did the source frame AI's overall role right now?
Fundamentally, as an efficiency tool, they compared it to the scientific calculator, something that dramatically boosts human capability for certain tasks, especially simple, repetitive ones.
A grounded view. And why are gaming and media seeing the first big impacts?
Because they offer the quickest, clearest efficiency wins from current AI. Think generating more complex game characters, NPCs, or speeding up animation and design work. AI takes over the laborious, repetitive parts.
Optimizing existing workflows. Makes sense.
Right. Another analogy used was the shift from print to the internet. AI speeds up generating and distributing content or analysis, much like the internet sped up information transmission compared to physical paper.
So what's the status of AI adoption, according to this view?
It's primarily an efficiency tool improving work and life. Using something like ChatGPT is most effective when you have a clear goal. Without that, the source noted, it's maybe not much better than a regular search engine.
And how's it being used in industry, based on the source's experience?
Very helpful for research, especially finding info on niche product areas, maybe in China, where some data is scarcer. Finding papers, summarizing text, analyzing data, sparking ideas. It was noted as particularly good with English text because of its logical structure for summarization.
Practical, real-world efficiency gains. Okay, so AI is driver number one. What's the other major demand driver highlighted?
Autonomous driving, big one. Also needs huge compute power, often using chiplets inside the car.
And it's not just the main brain chip, right? It drives other upgrades.
Absolutely. The whole suite of automotive electronics gets upgraded. We're currently seeing wider adoption of L2 features, adaptive cruise control, lane keeping.
Basic driver assist stuff.
Right. But even that requires more hardware, more radar, especially for following distance. Higher resolution cameras, the source mentioned, on semi-chips, going from maybe 2 or 3 megapixels up to 5 or 8 megapixels. Better resolution means better machine vision, plus pre-controllers, corner radar.
So even L2 means more silicon. What about L3 or L4, true self-driving?
That needs way more sophisticated algorithms and significantly more compute power. Almost certainly requires chiplets, maybe advanced nodes for the main auto compute chips. Big step up.
The source touched on different approaches too, right? Like Tesla versus others.
Yeah, mentioned Tesla's vision-heavy approach, notably not using LiDAR. They use cameras and clever algorithms to simulate the point cloud data LiDAR provides.
Interesting. What about radar advancements?
4D imaging radar was highlighted as a promising direction. Companies like TI are making specialized chips for it, and apparently competing aggressively on price, like 50% cheaper than NXP, the source suggested. That signals intense competition or maybe confidence in scaling up.
And LiDAR itself. Still a lot of talk about it.
Huge potential market size, if adopted widely. The source did a quick calculation. 82 million cars a year, maybe 2 units each at 1,000 unit. That's over a $100 billion potential market. But current volume is low. Profitability totally depends on scale.
What are the roadblocks for LiDAR?
A few challenges mentioned. Performance in high heat, like on a car roof. Issues with fog and rain, its ability to see through them can be limited, similar to fog lamps, which is why some, like Tesla, favor vision, plus maybe that 4D radar, which apparently works better in fog and is cheaper.
So technical hurdles remain for LiDAR.
Definitely, though the source also acknowledged the importance of the risk takers pushing these new technologies forward. That's how progress happens.
So boiling it down for AI and auto driving, what are the absolute certainties for semiconductor demand?
Clear takeaways. AI needs compute power, servers, optical modules. Auto driving needs sensors, cameras, radar, and compute power in the car. These are fundamental requirements driving demand, no question.
Solid pillars for future growth.
Yeah.
Okay, we've covered tech and drivers. Let's shift to market dynamics and investment practicalities. Beyond chip design, what about other segments? IP vendors, for instance.
Right, the intellectual property vendors. They design and license specific functions, like reusable blueprints. Their business model, described by the source, is more project-based. They get design fees, which can sustain them, but the really explosive profit comes only if a chip using their IP becomes a massive hit.
Their success depends on their customers' success. What about those advanced packaging factories?
For them, it's all about breakthroughs in the packaging tech itself and working super closely with the big lead customers who need that cutting-edge packaging for their complex chiplet designs. Their fate is tied to the bleeding edge.
Makes sense. And the more standard, mature manufacturing operations.
Those are evaluated more like traditional factories. Capacity utilization, how busy are the lines, yield, how many good chips come out, equipment age and depreciation, standard manufacturing KPIs.
Got it. And the source noted a specific dynamic in the A-share market for new ventures.
Yeah, an observation that new tech companies there might get a huge make-it valuation really early before they've proven mass production. The market prices in the potential success up front.
High risk, high reward, potentially very volatile.
Exactly. If they hit volume, it works out. If not, big correction.
Okay, another huge topic, domestic substitution and geopolitics. How did the source frame China's semiconductor development?
As basically following the established global trends while acknowledging gaps remain in some categories compared to the big international leaders.
And for understanding those global trends, pricing, roadmaps, where should people look?
The source strongly recommended watching the big overseas tech companies, especially in the US. They have decades of experience, 30, 60 years, navigating multiple cycles. Their major strategic bets, like Qualcomm focusing on edge compute or Apple investing heavily in MR, are usually based on deep analysis and have a higher chance of succeeding and scaling. Watching them gives vital clues.
Learn from the leaders with long track records. Were specific areas mentioned where domestic Chinese capabilities are scarcer, competition less fierce?
Yeah, FPGAs were one. Field programmable gate arrays, few listed domestic players, maybe one for civil use, and fewer global competitors overall compared to, say, CPUs or memory. RF front-end chips were another radio frequency components, fewer domestic rivals to giants like Qorvo or Skyworks, less of a red ocean in those spots.
Interesting. On the other hand, are there areas where domestic companies are strong, even in crowded markets?
Yes, definitely. The source noted some excel in super competitive areas like phone or IoT chips. They manage to get high gross margins, maybe 40%, even when competitors only get 20%.
Wow.
By being incredibly good at cost management or leveraging volume effectively, investing there means finding the companies that consistently win the churn in those tough markets.
Requires understanding operational excellence.
Yeah.
What about the impact of sanctions, like equipment restrictions from the Netherlands or Japan?
The source viewed lithography, those advanced etching machines from ASML, as the really hard part to replicate independently. But many other types of semiconductor equipment, like cleaning etching tools, those were seen as achievable domestically with enough time and investment.
So lithography is the main bottleneck. How does this geopolitical situation affect business models?
It can create a split. Global companies benefit from massive scale, lowering costs. Companies potentially limited initially to just the China market might face higher costs. That's where government support becomes crucial, the source emphasized, to help domestic players lower costs early on and build scale to eventually compete globally. They used South Korea's auto industry as an analoger, started domestic, got support, then became global players based on volume and cost.
That's a helpful comparison. What about specific nodes like 28 nanometer? Why focus there sometimes domestically while others push advanced nodes?
The logic offered was that 28 millimeters and older nodes are mature. There's already lots of global capacity. So for the US or Japan, building more mature capacity might be less compelling than investing in the next cutting edge. China's 28 millimeters situation is complex, depends on the specific product, utilization, yield, demand for chips made on that node within China. It's not simple. They compared it to the panel industry LCD versus OLED dynamics.
Right, depends on the specific market segment.
Yeah.
Okay, one last really practical area.
Mm-hmm.
Tracking the inventory cycle sounds notoriously hard. Any good leading indicators?
Honestly, the source said reliable leading indicators are really tough to find.
So how do you track it then?
Well, there are indirect clues. One really interesting one mentioned was the rental price of nitrogen cabinets.
Nitrogen cabinet.
Yeah, where companies store finished silicon wafers before they cut and package them. They hold wafers there to delay starting the product shelf life clock or building up packaged inventory. So if rental prices for those cabinets go up, it might mean companies are holding more raw wafer inventory.
That is incredibly specific, a real ground-level indicator. What about more direct data?
That comes from official company reports. Quarterly earnings showing inventory levels changing. Also, some big foundries, especially in Taiwan, release monthly revenue or shipment data voluntarily. That can give clues about overall activity.
So mostly relying on public company data, even if it lags a bit.
Pretty much. The source stressed using public data from foundries, packagers, Fableless designers, earnings calls, and reports. And importantly, look at the trend over time, not just one data point. Avoid the noise.
And how does inventory connect back to the bigger picture?
It's all linked. Inventory reflects upstream foundry costs and capacity and downstream customer demand. To really get a handle on one company's inventory, you need to know their products. Monitoring chips, phone chips, IoT, their markets, their customers, module makers, brands. Because if their customers are overstocked, they stop ordering. You need to understand the whole chain.
So you might need visibility one or two steps down the supply chain. That explains why it's so complex.
It really is interconnected.
Okay, we have covered an enormous amount of ground. History, global structure, tech drivers like chiplets and AI, market dynamics, investment angles. Let's try to synthesize and look ahead. Perspectives on investing, future trends.
Right. First off, investing here is tough. The source acknowledged that. It's complex, super cyclical, hard to time with clear leading indicators. Some investors just stay away.
Understandable. What about navigating cycles in the A-share market specifically?
The suggestion was, maybe counterintuitively, that success there might mean buying at peak pessimism and selling at peak optimism, a different pattern than other sectors, perhaps.
Buying when everyone thinks it's doomed.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Because stock prices look ahead 6-9 months, maybe. So peak pessimism, when the market thinks inventory will kill companies, might be the time when the price already reflects the worst, offering an opportunity if you believe they'll survive. An example was given of a stock priced as if it were closing down in 2022, which could have been a buy if you had conviction.
Interesting contrarian approach. What about the 2023 AI hype? Did the market get that right?
The source felt the market was actually pretty effective initially, especially pricing the impact on gaming and media creation, where efficiency gains were quick and obvious. There was data supporting it, and those sectors were coming off lows. So the initial market logic seemed sound.
Market efficiency in action, at least sometimes.
Seems so.
The source also reflected on the value of different experiences. Trading stocks, VCPE investing, working inside a company.
Right. They mentioned an analogy about bond traders maybe needing more brain power due to leverage compared to stock traders. Just an aside.
What about the primary market VCPE experience? What was valuable there?
Information gathering and deeper business thinking. Public info is scarce, so you have to do deep dives, interviews, downstream checks, building the whole picture. It also gives more time for reflection, since valuations aren't daily. And assessing the management team, the people, is absolutely critical, very valuable, though the source preferred the liquidity of public markets.
And the experience inside a listed company, doing strategic investments.
That gave the insider view. Understanding how the business really runs day to day. Customer interactions, how chips perform in the field, marketing tactics. Seeing those operational details apparently deepens overall business understanding immensely.
Layers of perspective. Comparing valuation systems, the source saw the U.S. as more mature, especially after higher interest rates post-2019.
And drew that parallel between China's current tech valuations and the U.S. .com era, 1980-2000. That period also had those huge make-it valuations followed by crashes. Market maturity involves those cycles, leading to more rationality eventually.
So maybe China's market is going through a phase the U.S. already experienced. What current trends does the U.S. market reflect now?
Clearly, AI and autonomous driving. Auto driving seen as offering real benefits, safety, relaxation. AI seen as weaving into work, repetitive tasks, and life, map navigation efficiency, tangible impacts being priced in.
Are there simple historical patterns investors can still use?
Maybe looking at past tech booms. Railroads, radio, cable, wireless offer some insight into cycles. But the source cautioned that simple patterns are incredibly hard to exploit now because of quant trading. Quants evolved from basic correlation to complex stat arb. The easy money from simple patterns is gone.
Algorithms change the game. So what's the recommended investment strategy now, and where to get info?
Strategy. Active, focused, deep understanding within your circle of competence. Know the business, know the people running it, understand the trends. Specialization is key. You can't know everything. Business and people over trading techniques.
And for learning about semi specifically.
English books on semiconductor history are a good start. Then, dive into public info from the global leaders, TSMC, annual reports, interim reports, investor day stuff.
Start with the investor relations pages of the big names.
Exactly. Ton of info there. The source suggested, for example, tracking how NVIDIA's strategy and customer base changed from 2000 to today. That shows you how the industry evolves.
Historical context plus deep current knowledge. Okay, finally, looking ahead, 3-5 years. What are the key semiconductor trends reiterated by the source?
The big two. AI and autonomous driving, still the main engines.
AI's impact specifically.
Driving demand for storage, compute and memory for the edge, advanced process nodes for the processors, and advanced packaging like chiplets to put it all together.
And autonomous driving's impact.
Needs chiplets for the car's brain, drives upgrades across all auto electronics, pushes demand for L2 sensors, radar, cameras, and eventually needs even more advanced compute and chiplets for L3, L4.
So these two huge trends create very specific concrete demands throughout the semiconductor supply chain.
Yep. They're seen as major catalysts stimulating investment in equipment, new fabs, packaging tech over the next few years.
And key companies positioned to benefit.
Compute, NVIDIA, AMD mentioned, communication, Qualcomm, Skyworks, others potentially. Optical modules are key too. Auto driving, Tesla compute on semi cameras, TI, radar, other radar specialists.
Wow. This deep dive has really unpacked a lot about semiconductors, the global complexity, the forces shaping it.
Yeah, we've seen chiplets aren't just hype, they're a necessary evolution as Moore's law gets tougher.
And how huge trends like AI and autonomous driving create real fundamental demand, pulling innovation through the whole chain.
Navigating it means understanding the tech, the global players, the inventory cycles, the geopolitics. It's a lot.
And ultimately, as the source suggests, it takes deep, focused analysis, often learning from the big global leaders, to really get a grip on this critical industry.
It really demands both that technical curiosity and sharp business insight.
So we've talked about history, cycles, how hard predictions are, and this constant push for new tech chiplets, AI, autonomous systems. It leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. In an industry defined by relentless change and unpredictable cycles, how much can those historical patterns really guide us anymore? And how much does success just come down to backing the right teams, the ones building that future, even when the exact path forward isn't perfectly clear?
Something to chew on as you keep watching this space.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.